to Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty Gensius, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and a host for Circular Firing Squad. We have 4 members, 4 questions, and 4 answers to each question. Each squad member generates a question that we all have to answer, and some of it's silly and some of it's sincere, and some of it's just sincere and silly. So let's see what we've got. Who's here tonight? We'll start up with an introduction.
Hi, everyone. Elliott Ingersoll from Cleveland State University and host of Apply Topically.
Hi, everyone. Steph Murder here, doctoral candidate at Kent State University and practicing clinical counselor.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mitch Conrad, licensed professional counselor.
Okay. Hey. So, Elliott, you've got the first start with the first question.
Yeah, let's start heavy. What are your thoughts on Senate Bill 1 in Ohio and its impact on counselor education programs in Ohio?
Marty, when you did this lineup, why putting me first? Just because the whole thing saddens me. I don't know. I mean, to the most degree, it's not like there's some ideas, but I just see things kind of coming apart already on campuses and other places that it took so long to build and to get space for. And now it's not allowed. And I don't know, it's troubling to me in those ways. And I feel when you're talking about counselor education, these are populations that we work with and represent and advocate for and ally with. And it's difficult for me to think how that on that part it's going to impact. I don't know if people feel comfortable coming into counselor education programs in some ways, especially because we as counselor educators and counselors touch on a lot of the stuff that is kind of being eliminated at the moment.
Elliott, can you help us a little bit? Because I realize we're familiar with Senate Bill 1 in Ohio, but we have people outside of Ohio that listen to us. So can you give us a little breakdown of what it does or what it proposes to do?
Sure. Yeah, there are several key provisions, and one of them is banning diversity, equity, inclusion programs, movements, scholarships on campus. And this is supposedly with an eye to true intellectual diversity. It bans faculty from striking. It shortens trustee terms and requires actual training for trustees, which we'll talk about these in order, but when we get to it. But it also requires an American history course for undergraduates, and it requires posting syllabi online, and it also has clauses that require, I don't know if it's permission or notification for programs that are partnering with the People's Republic of China. Those are some of the main provisions that are in my mind.
Yeah, I think you're close on that. You got most of it for what it is. And I guess Mitch is next on this.
So I'm a member of the Government Relations Committee for OCA as well. So I've got about, I think, 3 years of advocating against this bill at this point, even back when it wasn't even Senate Bill 1, I think it was 83. And this is a really concerning bill. I don't know exactly how things are going to go with it. I've spent some time doing workshops and just raising awareness for people who are getting into the counseling field, counseling students, at CSU's program about hey, how is this bill potentially going to affect people who are going to come in and see you in counseling? But this was about counselor education programs specifically. I think one of the additional things, if I'm remembering correctly, I think there was a tenure track thing in there too about increasing frequency for tenure evaluations. And it, I think worries me because on one hand, I think as a teaching professional, someone can be thinking yeah, I'm just going to continue to teach from my perspective. I don't know how, truly, I really don't know how much the state is going to be able to monitor this or come down on this. I think what ends up potentially happening is just the colleges themselves are reacting and creating rules and regulations, and that can maybe be a bit of an overreaction. I understand it's reducing legal liability. I just don't understand. I just don't see how much. I don't know how much the state is going to really be able to monitor what individual professors are doing inside of classrooms The syllabus stuff is, like that feels sometimes like helpful for students, but like that would be helpful for like students taking a class, but that's not the intention behind the bill either. My concern is that I think this will have some amount of effect to drive people away from higher education positions, and that people will be less likely to pursue positions in higher education moving forward, and that could actually have that could be the really detrimental effect on the system, is just like less people inclined to be moving into like counselor education positions.
Yeah, my understanding is the bill is passed and will take effect June 27th in the state. And the thing that you were talking about, Mitch, in terms of post-tenure review. So we have to come up with a system. We also have to come up with a means and method without any, these are a lot of mandates without any direction and without any funding. So colleges have already figured out, at least at our university, it's going to add $1 million worth of unfunded mandates to our work. And so we're going to have to find that somewhere in a budget to do it. And we're already dealing with budget restrictions from the state. So that's one piece. I know, K-CREP accredited programs are required to have their syllabi available for students and for the public. So that's nothing new to us. But I think this making syllabi public is meant for people who want to go through our syllabi and find out that I teach a advanced multicultural counseling class where I say all the words that we're not supposed to say in Ohio anymore, and then, make an issue with it. In fact, my school director said, "Can you meet on Tuesday? We need to talk about this class you're going to teach in advanced multicultural." And I wrote him back and I said, "I'm teaching it right now. There's, the horse has already left the barn. Now, next time when it's taught, or if it's even taught in the future, is another thing. But right now, I feel like taking my syllabus and redacting all, with black bars, redacting all of the words that I shouldn't be using because it's going to hurt some snowflake in the state of Ohio, posting that as my syllabus and saying, here you go. I have kind of had it. This is the attempt for legislators to solve a problem that doesn't exist."
All right. Nice. No, good answers. Yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings. The DEI stuff, I think, has gotten out of hand. I went on a sabbatical, and I remember coming back, and all of a sudden, everyone's using this DEI, and I'm like, people think we're elite anyway. Now you're going to abbreviate something and piss them off even more. Just call it what it is, but that's neither here nor there. I think shortening trustee terms and training them is a good idea, but of course, for me, the question is, and again, this is coming from legislators who probably still think ketchup's a vegetable. So I don't have a lot of respect for the state of Ohio legislators, at least the ones I've met. So that's problematic. But, shortening the trustee terms, I think is probably okay, and training them. I never know where these bozos come from in the first place. It really blows my mind sometimes. Banning strikes, I haven't met an academic who knows how to fight yet. So I don't think we were ever in danger of having a strike, but, okay, maybe I'm wrong on that. The American history course requirement, I think, is a good thing, as well as checking what we're doing with China. We've had so many shyster outfits come through claiming, we're going to bring Chinese students who pay full freight and we'll bring them in a cohort. It's just a big scam. And I'm not really sure why we're not putting that kind of energy into getting, support for like local students, especially graduate students. I think some of the larger issues are going to affect K-CREP, not necessarily Senate Bill 1, but I agree with Marty. Yeah, we already put our syllabi up. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, I want a test case. Yeah, look at my syllabus. I'm going to use the words that, I don't know, you say I'm not supposed to use, but we're studying human beings, human nature. So I want to see a test case. Let's take it to the courts. This is what blows my mind. Not one freaking university president testified against this bill. Screw them. What a bunch of gutless cowards. That blew my mind. And I'm like, this is what I'm talking about when I say academics wouldn't know a fight if it kicked them in the groin. So that kind of ticked me off. Yeah, in terms of like intellectual diversity, when I taught multicultural counseling, I had all kinds of stuff in there. I taught objectivism at Ayn Rand as one example of a viewpoint. we looked about conservative and liberal political ideologies, and I didn't have a problem including them both. I don't really see that as a problem. But I think the fact that the legislature is doing it is bound to fail because they don't know what they're talking about. And also wonder, how's this going to affect veterans, women? It's not just the groups that they seem to be trying to paint targets on, LGBTQ plus people, groups like that. It's going to affect a lot more people. So I have mixed feelings, but I don't think it's all bad. And I think we really need to wake up and so-called smell the coffee and figure out what fight we are going to take on, because we're going to have to take one on.
Okay. Stephanie, we need a palate cleanser.
Well, yeah. Well, luckily, my question is, what do you do when you need to clear your mind?
We'll talk about a timely question here. One of the things that I've been exploring myself lately is why it sometimes feels hard to clear my mind. And I think this was something that came up for me over the course of the last year in my graduate program, was the idea of the emotions of guilt and shame surrounding rest. And that I think, at least for me, a lot of what was coming up was the idea of well, if I'm resting, that means that I'm not doing something. That means that I need to be I should be doing something. I should be, engaging in some activity. Even I noticed conversations around self-care inside of my graduate program tended to be about doing things specifically, right? And there wasn't as much of a conversation, at least not something that I noticed, and maybe it was just that I wasn't paying attention, but that more about the idea of destigmatizing rest and destigmatizing the experience of that. And just we do so much in this country, especially compared to, I'm thinking other countries around the world, that it feels like the emotional state when I am trying to clear my mind tends to be what matters the most. And if there's some additional guilt and shame coming up around the idea of trying to clear my mind and rest, then that's, indicative of some reconceptualization, I think, of what that means. So I think it's been helpful for me of even just hey, I'm just going to lie down for an hour and not have to focus on anything and not be thinking and if something comes up where it's oh, I need to do something, no, I don't need to do anything right now. It's okay to rest and relax and just take a little bit of time off.
I'll tell you, I think about retirement. That's what I think about when I need to clear my mind. And that is, but seriously, I mean, I do have thought about that in terms of what that's going to be like. And my fear is it's going to be not as exciting as what I get to do with my current employment right now. Although I have issues with the kind of work I have to do at times. But in general, I think, I can see a future where retirement is included in it. Very simply, the simple answer to this question is very pragmatic. I sit in this office for hours in a day. I'm here and this is my home office. I'm here from at least 8 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night, doing some work and doing some other things that I do, like these podcasts. And I enjoy that portion of it. But if I really have to clear my mind, there are 2 chairs that are downstairs in our living room next to a big window that I can look out on the cul-de-sac that we live in. And I go down there and sit in the chair. And generally that gets Aileen interested, and she comes over and sits with me, because when I'm not down there, I'm up here, and she's very good about not bothering me if I'm in my home office and doing something. So when I come out of this cave, it gives me an opportunity to go downstairs and just simply sit in one of those easy chairs, maybe have a cup of coffee and offer to make a cup of coffee for her. And we sit and we talk for a little bit, catch up on what's been going on. She fills me in on all the batshit crazy stuff that's going on in the news. And that makes me want to go back in my cave. And I kind of fill her up with what kinds of work I'm busy and what I'm doing with my work, to the degree that I can share that. So that's my way of clearing my mind, is getting out of this room and going downstairs and sitting in an easy chair for a little bit. I agree with you, Mitch. There's too much of, you got to do this, you got to do that. Here's a breathing cycle thing you should do. Here's this. It's I'll go downstairs and get out of the space I'm in, get out of the energy I'm in. and sit in a chair. And all the other stuff, yeah, I can do that. But this is what I do when I really need to clear my mind. Elliott.
This has never really been a problem for me. And I think some of it's my ADHD style brain. When I get super focused on something, everything else can drop away for long periods of time. When I want to intentionally clear my mind, exercise or playing music usually does it, or just listening to music super loud. Ideally, some headbanger, new metal, something like that. I love that. But especially since I got long COVID, man, there's so many blank spots in my mind brain that they call it brain fog. But it's just like, yeah, nothing happening. No brainstorming in Elliott. It's clear and sunny.
Thanks for your answers. I have different levels. So like when I'm in the middle of something and I need to just like stop what I'm doing and like get on a completely different track, it's Fortnite. I'm not really good at Fortnite. I only play solo and I play no build, but it's really fun. And I enjoy, for whatever reason, thinking that I'm taking out a whole bunch of like 10 to 13-year-olds that are like playing behind. So then when I have energy and time and I have a little more time and the weather cooperates, I like going out into the garden and weeding or kind of like training the viney flowers or seeing how the berries are doing, except they keep getting taken. So I know that they're, ripening, but I don't know how they're getting in. I have a whole net situation, but I'll have to look into that further. But I like going out into the different areas of plants that we have around our house. And then sometimes, though, I'm not trying to take a break or change focus or clear my mind, but I just end up going down Reddit rabbit holes endlessly. And I just read like on every single topic. And I think sometimes that's just my brain saying, oh, you're not going to take a break. I'm going to take one for you. There it is.
Yeah. Mitch, you have got the next question.
So speaking about Reddit rabbit holes and not being able to go down Reddit rabbit holes, this is because I just recently lost power for almost 3 days. So the question here is, what would you do if you lost power for 3 days or more? How would you pass the time?
The first one goes to me, and I got to tell you, I had an experience where I didn't lose power for 3 days. I lost power for 3 weeks. There was a hurricane you might remember or might not remember. When was it? I was in Charleston, so it was probably sometime in 1990. Hurricane Hugo, and it was Cat 4. It was a Cat 4 hurricane that came to Charleston, and it didn't do a lot of damage on our house, but it took the power out basically on the whole peninsula, and particularly where we were, for 3 weeks. And it was a different experience. I didn't do much computer stuff back in that time. We had cell phones, but cable TV out. Any kind of, at that time, form of entertainment was out. And my wife was pregnant. So we spent time walking around the place where we lived. It was a large apartment complex, and, with the kind of southerny screened-in porches that were all busted out. And, you had a series of rain that happened everywhere. So we spent a lot of time going to bed early and getting up early. My job at the time was working with severely emotionally handicapped kids. So when the storm was coming, we had to make sure that they were sheltered and safe or had been moved to some facility. I hate to tell you, but some of them disrupted so badly, they wound up getting moved to the state hospital farther up farther up the state, away from the pathway of the hurricane, which was for their sanity and safety. Others found safe shelter with their families or with relatives off the peninsula. But Aileen and I, sat the evening through the storm. It was not bad. We didn't get a lot of damage, some torn screens. The biggest problem was that we were on the first floor, and this was a 3-story apartment, and the chimney was completely pulled off. So everybody was getting water damage as the rains were coming down through that. And I remember crawling up through a crawl space in the third floor apartment with somebody. And I crawled up there just to be able to put like tarp over the hole where the chimney used to be. We just spent a lot of time connecting. It was just really quite a good experience. And it wasn't 3 days, and we didn't have technology for distraction or to mourn because we didn't have it. We just spent our time like being really connected, figuring out how to live, where to get food, where to get water, which was also a problem in terms of getting potable water. Going to the grocery stores and being let in for 30 minutes to get whatever you could get because that power wasn't on. So they couldn't just let anybody go in at any time because they didn't know who was going in and coming out. So those kinds of experiences, particularly when they're prolonged, are character building in a way. And you get to get a sense of who your self is. To me, it's similar like camping in the boundary water area of Canada and going up there for 10 days and being completely disconnected from power other than the batteries that you bring. That's my answer to that one.
No, they're all good answers. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Canada thing because where my uncles, there was no power or anything like that. And like you said, we rose earlier, we went to sleep earlier, kind of made sense. But when I think of losing power, reading and playing music, so I'll work on my bass, I'll work on my guitar, and I'll read as long as the light allows it. One of the funnest times, I think we only lost it for a day and a half, so compared to what people go through in a hurricane, that's not a lot. But we always had the big, one of those power bricks that you charge up. And the kids were little. And then we watched some DVDs on my laptop using the power brick. That was kind of fun. And then when my partner and I lived we were living in Sin in our first apartment. And there was an outage and we got on well with the neighbors and we had a wee little block party. And because everyone it was summer, everyone came out and that was just another nice experience. I remember losing power in the winter. That was not so fun. But thank goodness we have a stove up here on the third floor, so we wouldn't freeze to death, but we'd all be crammed into the third floor when that's happened. Yeah, that's an interesting question, though, because our dependence on energy and energy storage it's designed to be as invisible as possible, but it dictates the way we live.
Yeah, so we haven't lost power for that long recently, knock on wood. Been very fortunate in that way. The other day, about a week and a half ago, I was outside and I knew the sound once it happened, but it was just so loud, like an explosion. And the last time I heard that was 12 years ago when the transformer right next to our house blew. And this must have been a transformer also right next to our house, but on another side. Because then I knew, and it was just silent. And I was like, oh, okay, yep, here we go. But it was only a few hours, which I was impressed with. But I was thinking about what am I going to do? What am I going to do with Nora, which would be the hardest part, because I think two adults, we would be able to kind of get on and figure out a way to just kind of manage and, do some of the stuff that you all had mentioned so far. I think though, and at the same time, if it's too hot, I'm just going to go to a hotel. It depends on how far and widespread the outage is. Cause like with what Marty's saying, that's not going to really be the easy out. But if it's just like 25 homes in your general vicinity, then yeah, I'm going to go down the street and get a room and be comfortable. I guess that's the easy answer, and that like it creates the least amount of change. But I've gone to summer camp when there was no electricity, and there's something really nice. It's just that the grown-ups at the time, you have to have people plan events and things for you, and like scavenger hunts. Then it's really fun. But there's something to be said for being nice and quiet. But anyway, I think go to the hotel. Around the corner was a Starbucks. That's where I went to try to download some shows the other day. I don't know. I was taking it easy.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your answers, stuff you said there about like the sounds. That was, I think, one of the things that I gradually was keying into of like my sensory experience related to noise was so different, because there's not like the hum of a refrigerator or the air conditioning or lights or all the little sounds that go on that we don't notice anymore because they're sort of like part of our daily existence. So that was eerie, but also like relaxing in a sense. For me, really just got a chance to like have like a little bit of a reset, because sometimes like I can get, especially with electronics, like really into like talk about like those Reddit rabbit holes. But like in terms of like electronics, typically like when I'm using electronics a lot, like sometimes I won't, like I'll be so immersed in that sometimes I'll forget or not pay as much attention to like, yeah, I should go outside and sit in a chair and just enjoy the weather and enjoy the sun and look at the trees and all that kind of stuff. And so spent some time reading, got outside, went to some parks, took some walks, and it was quite nice. Like it didn't usually, like I remember when I was younger, I would be really distraught when the power would go out, and it would almost kind of like ruin my day. And at this point, it's sort of like had the opposite, where it was like, oh, I guess it'll come back on when it comes back on. And, by day 3, I was like, please. But, the first 2 days, it was like, yeah, this is okay. This is nice. It's a different kind of experience for even a short time period.
Okay. And then the final of the 4 questions that we have tonight, official questions, is mine. And my question is, did you find out something about your family later in life that would have changed your whole perspective?
Not really. There's one thing that might have helped, but I don't know. It was something I went through, and I learned later, much later, that 2 of my uncles had gone through it too. And I don't think that was something it was in their nature to talk about. So I'm not sure it would have changed anything in that sense. But honestly, bless my parents. My dad, especially, he was right on top of the whole alcohol thing. He's like, all right, we got to talk. Our family has a problem with alcohol. The things that were really important, I felt like they really tried to pass on to me, things about family history, perhaps genetic vulnerability, things like that. So I think I got pretty lucky with who my family was in that sense.
Oh, right. So my answer is that I don't think I learned anything new that changed my whole perspective. What it did was solidify my perspective over time, and just more and more. And when I was younger, I didn't want to believe that certain extended parts of our family, actually didn't care about us or didn't want to include us, even though we were there. That was my aunt and uncle. And throughout time, there were lots of things that solidified that. And I will say that the last thing that has happened recently was about 3 months ago. Through a Google search or something that my mom was doing for whatever reason, she found out that my aunt had been dead for 2 years and nobody told us. So just kind of crazy stuff. And then when, so just things like that. So it just get more and more clear over time that there's just no desire to know us. So that got easier to let go.
So love this question. Answer is yes. That story probably isn't safe for a podcast like this, but in terms of what I would say was meaningful is exploring. One of the ways that I'm getting into counseling as a practitioner is moving more towards trauma-focused models, something like exploring family systems. And one thing that I have paid really close attention to inside of my own, when I've been providing counseling, is really paying attention to how the relationship with the parents, and also then in my own story, my parents' relationships with their parents and sort of how they were treated. And a lot of times where I'll be sitting with and counseling with someone, and then I'll ask about the relationship that they have with their parents, or some of the ways that their parents treat them. And it's and if they're having a concern with a behavior that they're having, it's oh, this actually really makes sense of why this is patterning again. And I think it was when I started to explore how my parents were treated by their parents, and those were some pretty uncomfortable conversations, but that gave so much more insight. And I guess in a way, this can be an empathy building exercise too, where it's oh, I didn't know that happened until I was in my 30s, but that would have provided so much more context for a lot of different situations. And I think like that is something that I've noticed about how like exploring that and asking those questions can like provide some, it may not necessarily like decrease the emotional pain or anything like that, but it may provide some amount of insight, increased empathy, and also like, I'd say like just understanding. And so that has felt really helpful. So there's been times where like, I think about like what Dr. I said about like, yeah, there's been a lot of times where I've noticed like my family like informing like me and my life, especially about something like alcohol, have had, I would say, like a very boundaried relationship with alcohol in my life. I in fact like don't even drink anymore. But that occurred because I think like my mom had such like deep conversations with me about that and like warning about like, hey, like this is something that is like a family history thing on both sides. And so I think that can be helpful for like children when they're ready for like parents to be having those conversations about like what happened. Yeah, just some thoughts there.
Mitch, I don't know about you, but I was really grateful. I felt like as an 11-year-old, wow, my parents trust me to talk about some really serious things. It kind of, I think it helped my self-efficacy too, that they would talk to me about it.
Well,
I would agree.
Yeah, my news came a little bit later than that. There are two stories to this. There's one story that happened about 4 weeks ago for me that produced this question. And then there's one story that I tell in my marriage and family counseling class that is about an experience I had as I was growing up. So the first one is very simple. I was in Chicago about 4 weeks ago, was at an Asian restaurant and started to get sweats. My watch went off and said, "Hey, it looks like you're an AFib." And I always taught myself, if God's going to take me, let him take me in an Asian restaurant after I've just had a good meal. That would be so poetic. That would be poetic justice. My wife does not see the humor in that. So as I'm being driven to the hospital by my brother-in-law, who's driving my car while my sister is driving her car and with my wife, my brother-in-law, who's a physician, says, your mom had AFib. And it was like, she's been dead for 10 years. That would have been good information for me to know in terms of being able to tell my doctor since I'm being treated for all this heart stuff and blood pressure. So that's the first one. Probably the major one that changed my whole perspective was my mother came when Aileen was pregnant with our second child, Will. Aileen had really bad morning sickness. And so we had a toddler with Hannah, and then Will was on the way, and my mom came down to visit and help Aileen because I was going to work. I was also working on my doctorate at the time. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life. And so she came and stayed with us in South Carolina, and she had a chance to observe me playing with Hannah. And my mother never talked ill of my father, but she said to me, "You are so different with your children than your father was with his," meaning us. And it was one of these moments, it's like, okay, I can let this go and say thank you, or I can push a little bit harder. And I pushed a little bit harder and I said, "Why do you think that was?" And she said, "Because he never learned it from his own father." And my father was a great provider, good man, but very silent in terms of the kids. He was not let's go outside and pitch the ball around. He worked, he came home, he had dinner. He was there for us. He supported us in other academic things that we did, but wasn't kind of a person who played with kids. He was much focused on education. And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah, don't you know he never came to our wedding? His father never came to my mother and father's wedding because he objected to my father marrying a North Side Irish Catholic when he was a South Side Lithuanian." And there's other stories in that. There's parts where my father during the war sent back money, expecting to be able to have money to create his own home with his wife and, future kids. And the dad collected all of that money. It was sent to the dad. And when he got back, it was nowhere to be found. So there was this very strange relationship with his father that he never really figured out how to work with kids. That changed my whole perspective on my dad. I suddenly got to understand who my dad was and why he was with who I was. He had passed on like 10 years before then. So we never were able to have this conversation about that. So it was, for me, kind of one of those meaningful moments where it changed my whole perspective on what my family history was about, just by that simple conversation with my mother. So that wraps it up for our regular questions. I have one question, which I think actually comes from Mitch as a final shot question. What foods or flavors can you just not get jazzed about?
Anyway, yeah, as we have thousands of listeners, I know there must be a couple who stock the vending machines in Joka Hall at Cleveland State University where I work. And I would just like to tell you, potato chips are potato chips. That's it. I don't want taco potato chips. I don't want rib flavored potato chips. I don't want foot smelling potato chips. I don't know what y'all are on, man, but you are dumping some. And it's like, we know this food's toxic. Your brand is highlighting this will kill you quickest. Have this one, Atomic Cheetos. I'm like, no, just put potato chips in. I don't like any of those flavors. Just potatoes that are deep fried. Deep fried, that evolutionary part of everyone's brain is like, how lovely. Yes, let's do that.
It's to you, Steph.
No, I know. I'm feeling called out for getting the spicy dill pickle chips yesterday.
What is the thing with dill? Dill pickles are now the thing.
It's the thing.
Food.
20 years ago, it was sun-dried tomatoes. Then it's like, I don't even know, but there's always a trend. And I am curious. They'll get me once because I have to try everything once. But really, overall, if there's something available, like, if it's something frozen, some raspberry, like I like raspberry in other capacities, but not like it could be really good. And I bet it could be really, really tasty. But if I hear it, I'm like, eh.
Sometimes I hear this suggested to me, which is what brought about the question. But I just can't do like mint flavored ice cream. It just... something like I don't want to say that it tastes like wrong or anything, but like I think in times that I've tried, like I sometimes will, like I like mints when it's like, oh, like a breath mint or something like that. But mint flavored dairy products, I can't get there for some reason.
Hey,
I bought that today
just
too.
a little. What's that?
I bought that today too. I bought mint chocolate chip ice cream.
You triggered in me a memory of menthol cigarettes, and I'm like, I had one puff of a menthol cigarette and I'm like, no, this will definitely kill me. I do not ever want this again. Any mint thing mixed into that was weird. But yeah, I hear you too. I wouldn't want any of those ice cream or otherwise.
Yeah, I smoked menthol. I smoked menthol cigarettes for years.
You're oppositional, Marty. Of course you did.
Yeah, and and have kicked that habit. I have an occasional cigar. My answer to this question, the reason I went to this question was because we came home from watching my daughter in Fiddler on the Roof out at Porthouse, and we said, let's get something to eat. We've been out in the heat. Let's just stop and get something to eat. And we went to a restaurant that's only vegetable that was available besides fried potatoes was broccoli. So if you wanted fish, you got it with broccoli. If you wanted, shrimp, you got it with broccoli. If you had chicken tenders, you got it with broccoli. And I thought, how can a restaurant just base their whole vegetable situation on broccoli? Now, that I don't like. I mean, I don't like broccoli, but I'm not here to talk about broccoli. I'm here to talk about Brussels sprouts. They're vegetable testicles. That's what they are. Elliott's going, here's a show title. I don't get it. And people are like, well, you put in a little, you put in some bacon and you put in, some Worcestershire or whatever. And they're just no. And they're like dill pickles. They have been the kind of vogue food for a while and just can't get jazzed about it. Just not my thing.
Okay, so nobody wants to come over to my house to eat, apparently. Anyway.
Do you have a dog that I can kind of feed the Brussels sprouts to under the table?
Brussels sprouts on the menu.
Not anymore. We did, but we have a turtle that we can give them to.
Yeah, Brussels sprouts, you gotta bread them. You gotta bread them first, and then you deep fry them or
Yeah,
bake 'em.
don't even try to convince me. I have now implanted and imprinted in your mind their vegetable testicles. So now, whatever way you make them, all you're going to think about is I'm eating some vegetables testicle.
Of all of the information you have, deposited into my brain, I am most grateful for that one.
Let's look for some of these characters on their podcasts on thepodtalk.net. That's the website, thepodtalk.net. Thanks to the firing squad, Elliott, Mitch, Stephanie, and I guess I can thank myself. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Ready, fire, aim.